Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Amplify webinar. We are so excited to be here today. Last week, if you missed Shala's webinar, please go to the Amplify Louisville YouTube page and check it out. She dropped so much knowledge, so much great knowledge on creating a really cohesive narrative within your pitch deck and being able to really portray that and tell the story of your startup through all of the different sections that belong in a pitch deck. The way that she articulated that was so cool, so helpful, and very easy to digest. So I highly encourage you all to go back and check that out. But
Thank
with
you.
that being said, I'm so excited to have her back again today for another webinar. And this week, we'll be recapping a little bit of last week. We'll be talking about VC myths, how to tell when you need an investor, finding the right investor, and also the three different types of decks that you need and how you can easily tailor those for your audience. So I'm so excited to have Shala back. Every time that she joins us, it is a dream. A few housekeeping things. Everyone should be on mute. If you're not, then go ahead and put yourself on mute. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you can go ahead and drop those in the chat. I'll be glancing at it, Shala will be glancing at it, but at the end, we will take actual time to go back and answer those questions, but we don't want you to forget them. So if you want to throw them in the chat throughout the presentation, then we will get to those questions at the end. And yeah, this is being recorded. So if there's anything that you miss, anything that you want to be able to go back and reference, you will be able to access this afterward, and it will be in the follow-up email that you will get after this webinar. So with that being said, my name is Kiana. I'm Director of Community Engagement here at Amplify Louisville, and I'm so happy to go ahead and turn it over to Shala Madavi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kiana. Let me go ahead and get my screen share going and we'll do the fun, can you guys screen kind of thing going on? Let's see here. Okay. Can you all see my screen okay? Yep. Okay. Awesome. So thank you again so much, Kiana, for having me today. I'm really excited to be here for kind of part 2 of this little webinar series that we've been working on. As Kiana said, my name is Shala Madavi. I am the founder of Studio Mod. And today we're going to be talking about how to tailor your pitch deck. So last week we talked about how to create a narrative, a compelling narrative, and a good story arc. And today we're going to be talking about how to kind of refine that. So for just a quick refresher for those of you who weren't here last time or don't know me, Studio Mod is a strategic design agency. We work exclusively with investors and tech startups, and our mission is to help drive a more equitable, innovative future. And I have a little over 14 years in the design industry. I have kind of served any role that one can think of when it comes to being in the design industry, everything from production designer to a creative director. I ran my own department for a while. I was even a front-end developer for a little bit. So my career's kind of run the gamut. I'm very fortunate to have had that. I have played the part in launching over 200 digital products and websites. I've executed a little over 65 brand identities, and I've got about 70 plus decks under my belt now. So that number continues to grow. And then kind of over here on the right, I have sort of my wall of fame of just some amazing companies and VCs that I have been able to work with. So we have a lot to cover today. I'm going to try not to run over like I did last time. So we'll go ahead and get into it. We'll just do a quick recap of last time, and I think that this slide is worth revisiting. So this is a quote from Ben Horowitz, who was one of the founding partners of Andreessen Horowitz. And we discussed this a lot last time. A company without storytelling is usually a company without strategy. We really got into the meat of why a story is kind of like having a strategy for your webs or for your business. Um, We also talked about some different types of storytelling. We talked about reports, how they're really kind of exhaustive. There's tons of information. There's usually a lot of data points, a lot of statistics, and that's exactly what they should be. And then kind of on the other end of the spectrum, we have dramatic story writing or storytelling. So, something like film or a piece of music, literature, and then presentations kind of tend to fall somewhere in the middle where you're wanting to create a compelling story, but you need to supplement that story with statistics and data and facts and figures. Um, the other thing that we talked about that I think is really important to remember, regardless of the investor type of investor that you're talking to, is they're going to want to know the answer to these burning questions. So these are some important questions that you should be considering whenever you're crafting your story, and then whenever you're tailoring that message, making sure that you're able to easily answer these questions. And kind of talking about this 10 slide framework that is really popular. You see a lot of it on the internet. And this is really more of a checklist. And what you should really be focusing on is being able to answer these questions versus trying to follow this very specific narrative. We also touched on, and I think this is also really important for today's conversation, that really the main goal of aside from seeking capital, when you're pitching or you're telling a story about your business to investors, is that you want to get them to empathize, you want to get them energized, and you want to get them engaged. Um, and I think today we're going to be talking a lot about the reverse of that. So the empathy part in particular, we're going to be talking about how we can develop empathy for investors, and hope that they can have empathy for us as we continue down our journey. Um, so that's just a quick recap of stuff that we covered last week. There's a whole lot. So as Kiana said, feel free to check out that YouTube video if you're interested in that. Today, we're going to be talking about some VC myths. We're also going to be talking about different ways to fundraise and if you even need an investor. And if so, how do you find the right investor? Then we'll really get into the meat of how to tailor that story. We'll talk about these kinds of 3 strategic decks that you're going to need. And then finally, we'll cover pitching virtually, because I think that's kind of it's a different, I don't want to say art form necessarily, but it's got a different tone and a different vibe. And we'll talk about some things that can help prepare you for pitching virtually. Um, so we'll get into a couple of myths. This is not an investor, and I realize that I'm kind of a film nerd. So this is a shot from Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, and this is a monolith. And I think it's important to recognize that investors are not monoliths. They are not all the same thing. They are not the same people. Every body is different, and every investor is different. They have different motivations, different things that excite them, different risks that they're considering. So you can't bucket all investors and say, all of these people are exactly the same. They're not monolithic in that way. This is also not your investor is also not your bestie. And I think that it should go without saying that they're not necessarily your best friend, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a good social relationship with them. At the end of the day, an investor is there to help to make money, right? So you really kind of need to think about them as investors and not necessarily your besties. You can have a good social relationship, but it's a business relationship nonetheless. And then this is also not, these guys are also not investors. Investors are not wizards. You're not going to necessarily go in, get capital, and then all of a sudden, become a multi-million-dollar company overnight, with the wave of a wand. That's just not going to happen. And then kind of breaking it down, I think that it's important to just outline what an investor is. And an investor is a person or an organization that puts money into a business with the expectation of a return. So I think that expectation of a return is really critical in remembering how you're pitching to them and how you're thinking about this relationship. This is a business relationship. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few VC myths, and then we'll get into some of this in a little bit deeper as we continue on down the presentation. So the first myth that I want to kind of dispel is that VC is the primary source of startup funding. That is absolutely not the case. We're going to take a look at some other ways to raise capital or to think about raising capital or generating revenue. Um, because VC is not the only way to seek funding. Another myth is that VCs take a big risk when investing. There's the old adage that, there's high risk, high reward. And that's not to say that it doesn't come with risks and that there are not risks that you should consider. There are, but VCs are really looking at the fund as kind of a holistic piece. So they're looking at returns on the fund versus necessarily like one company at a time. Um, and then the other myth is that most VCs offer great advice and mentoring. I wish this was true, but it's not necessarily true. As we stated before, VCs are not monolithic, so you can't say like all VCs are going to offer amazing advice and mentoring. Some of them do, but even within that sector that do, the way that you're going to get supported is going to vary from one person or one firm to another. So you can't say they're all going to offer great advice and mentoring because some of them do and some of them don't. The other thing that is a myth is that VCs generate amazing returns. This is not always the case. In fact, when I was doing some of my research for this presentation today, I came across an article in Harvard Business Review that said that the overall performance of the VC industry is relatively poor, and that it really hasn't significantly outperformed public markets since the 90s. So, they're not necessarily going to always generate amazing returns. Um, Another myth is bigger is better. This is not always the case. A lot of times we've heard of bubbles, right? So the money is coming in, returns are going to fall. Fund performance tends to decline as fund sizes increase. And then kind of another lens on that would be, if you're going to a big investment firm, you're working with like a big VC firm, it's easy to kind of get lost in the shuffle. So bigger is not always better when it comes to VC. Um, and then the last myth is that you need to be in Silicon Valley. This is absolutely not the case. We have tons of resources, even here in Louisville in the Midwest. And the pandemic has also really shifted that landscape, right? So we're no longer tethered to having to be on the coast in order to seek VC funding. We are now able to access people from all across the country, even across the world, using things like Zoom. And the pandemic has really shifted that landscape a lot. So we're going to talk about different ways to raise capital. And this is a little bit of an overwhelming slide, and that was done intentionally. And this is not even the full list of ways to raise capital. There are lots and lots of different ways to raise capital. So bootstrapping, which we'll talk about, there's friends and family rounds, there is, crowdfunding, there are peer-to-peer lending, there's angel investors, there's obviously traditional VC, there are corporate or sometimes called strategic investors, there are accelerator programs. Sometimes companies can qualify for government grants, which are non-dilutive funds, meaning you don't have to pay them back. There is debt financing, there are convertible notes, there's equity crowdfunding. Like I said, this is just kind of a high level overview. There are lots of other ways that you can raise capital. And so, I think that it's really easy to take a look at the news, or you look at Twitter or X, whatever you call it now, and you're seeing all of these companies are getting invested in, and that creates a win, and they must be super successful. But I think that a lot of that is just kind of jargon, or it gets spun a little bit out of control. And I think that startups often find that they're like, oh, well, we have to seek funding in order to grow the business. And that's not always necessarily the case. So I would encourage you, before you start out on the venture of fund, or before you start seeking funding, to consider if you really need to raise at all, because fundraising it's hard, it's exhaustive, it can oftentimes yield poor results. And so it becomes kind of a part-time or a full-time job rather. So I think, it's good to just at least take an inventory of, do you have intellectual capital? Do you have other co-founders you can kind of partner with to start to get your company up and running without necessarily having to get into a relationship with an investor? Um, I spoke with this is a local startup called Campaign Deputy, and they bootstrapped their entire company. They've done really, really well for themselves. They started as just like they have a technical founder and they had an industry insider. And together, with like a couple $1,000 and some old equipment, they were able to spin up this company. Campaign Deputy is now the a CRM of choice for Democratic campaigns, and they were behind the Andy Bashir campaign, the Maxwell Frost campaign. So, and they have not gotten a dime from investors. So I talked to Josh Bartley, who's one of the founders there, and he said that, some of the pros of bootstrapping versus getting an investor was that, they were able to make a lot of quick pivots. So they were able to really listen to their customers, and then without having to go through any red tape, they were able to pivot their strategies and their technology without much ado about it. So, they started as an app. They realized quickly that it needed to be a CRM. They were able to efficiently roll out features based on customer interviews, and again, pivoting swiftly based on feedback that they were receiving without having to go through any red tape. Now, some of the cons that he mentioned were that, he needed focus. And I think this is very true because as a founder, you're wearing a lot of different hats, and it's hard to remember where you need to focus your attention on and your time on. VC or an investor will certainly be able to help you with that. He said that they would have been told to invest in better branding, better design, better UI. As a designer, I obviously agree with that. And then tracking more KPIs. But this is not necessarily always the right path, right? So like if we kind of come back to looking at the different ways to raise capital, let's say, you're not a technical founder, or you don't have an industry insider to kind of co-founder with or partner up with. So we're going to do kind of a quick overview of a couple of these different groups here, these different types of investors. And these are really kind of the four, I guess, most prominent ones that we're hearing about. And so these are going to be angels, traditional VC. We're going to talk about corporate/strategic partners and accelerators. And then later on in the presentation, we're going to talk about how to think about tailoring your message to each one of these. So just a quick overview of angel investors. These are usually really high net worth individuals. They're willing to accept risks to fill a key niche that they might see in the startup ecosystem. These guys are people that you pass on the street every day. You just may not know it. They invest money out of their own pocket. They have gotten money either from they inherited, or they had a successful exit. There are many ways that people have money to become an angel investors, but they're investing their own money. So this is something they can do sort of on their own. They tend to invest in very early stage companies, and they're obviously seeking high growth potential. And this is a nice option if you're very, very early, because a lot of times it's hard to get a VC's attention or a corporation's attention when you're that early and you don't have any like financial metrics to back it up. They're going to be able to be really hands-on with you. They're going to be able to provide capital funding and then also some expertise. So some business consulting, perhaps getting you in front of the right people for networking. There are other ways that they can help you as an angel investor. And then another thing that a lot of angel investors do is they socialize their portfolio. So they're working within these kinds of like angel groups. So they're kind of saying, hey, Kiana's startup is really amazing. I'm investing some money in it. And then other people might take a look at that and say, oh, I love Kiana's startup. Let me come on board with it. So they're socializing their portfolio. So there's opportunity there to have additional angel investors as add-ons. So there are some really big names that have kind of come out of starting with an angel investor. I'm sure that most of you have heard of all of these guys. We've got Google. Their first investor was the founder of Sun Microsystems, and he was an angel. Amazon, Jeff Bezos had a number of angels. Uber, LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman is one of the founders of LinkedIn, and he was an angel investor. So as you can see, there's a lot of success that can come out of starting out with an angel investor. And then you have traditional VCs, and those are venture capitalists. And those are professional investment firms. So it's different because it's a group of people usually. And VC, I think that a lot of people don't recognize this or understand it, but VC, they actually invest money that's raised from what are called LPs or limited partners. And those are usually, large families or people with really, really deep pockets. And they're giving money to the VCs who then in turn invest in these startups. So they have a different sort of message that they have to take. They have different ways that they have to utilize that money. Now, VCs will invest in both early and late stage companies. We'll be focusing more on early stage companies, just given the audience here. But it's important to note that, like, for example, if you bootstrapped and you've gotten really successful and you've kind of reached a point where you're like, oh man, I really actually do need to seek capital to get to the next level of my business, you're at a later stage in that round, then VCs are happy to come on board and help you out with that. VCs are also going to be able to provide business and institutional knowledge. So again, beyond capital, thinking about, like, if you need help with biz dev or, operations or finding the right CTO, VCs are going to be able to help you with a number of different aspects in your business. They do invest on a mandate, so you have to be thoughtful about the types of VCs that you're researching or thinking about, because they have to keep their investors happy, right? So they have to keep their LPs happy. So they're investing on a mandate, which kind of restricts the types of companies, the series of companies that they can invest in. Um, there's obviously tons and tons of examples of folks that have won in venture capital. Snap, their first investor was Lightspeed Ventures. Spotify, they raised with two venture capitals, North Zone and Creandum, and they were able to then take their product globally. Square, their first investor was Khosla Ventures, and then Zoom was invested by Emergence Capital. There's tons of examples of these guys, but just kind of keeping with the flow here, showing some folks who started out with venture dollars and how successful they were able to be. The next one is corporate/strategic investors. And these are really established companies that invest to advance their own strategic objectives. So I worked with a VC firm called M12, and they were the venture arm of Microsoft. So it's what was really cool about it was really getting to understand how corporate and strategic investment worked. So they don't have to answer to LPs. It's not necessarily their own personal money, right? They're pulling from corporate accounts, or like what Microsoft did, they set up their own venture capital arm. Now, excuse me, they're going to prioritize how a startup aligns with their larger objectives. So if you, for example, if you were pitching a ride sharing service, Microsoft may not be interested in talking to you. Those visions don't align. Their vision and you doesn't necessarily align with their vision for the company, and your vision and what they can provide to you doesn't necessarily align with where you want to take your company. They are very, very interested in establishing deep partnerships, and they're going to be super, super focused on a partnership plan. Oftentimes, the end goal here is not necessarily an IPO or something, a traditional acquisition. They want to acquire these companies that they're sort of bringing into the mix here. So they're really looking for strategic partners that they can foster in-house and hopefully create good companies out of them and acquire them into their own ecosystem. It's hard to find like really good examples of well-known companies in the space because oftentimes they do get invested in by the corporation. Stripe, though, came out of they were actually spun out of Visa. Visa was on a mission to enhance digital payment strategies, and so Stripe came out of that. Lyft came out of GM. Niantic actually came out of Google, and with a little bit of assistance from Nintendo. And so Niantic, they are a video game producer. They created Pokemon Go, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. And then the last one that we'll talk about is accelerator programs. And they're really interesting because it's quite different, but there's a lot of opportunity there. Accelerator programs are organizations that help small startups grow for equity. They're really serving their accelerator sponsors. So if we take a look at GM, for example, they might be looking to up-level their autonomous vehicles. And so what they might do is they might create an accelerator and say, hey guys, go find like 12 different companies out there that we can incubate, we can bring them in-house, we can help them grow, and hopefully something good will come out of that. One thing to remember is that they will invest in you, but they're generally going to take a little bit more equity than any of these other investors that we've talked about or other investment types that we've talked about. So this is just kind of a default number. If they invest in 100K into your company, they might take something like 6%. So that's a trade-off there. But these are generally short-term engagements. They only last about 3 to 6 months. And one thing that's really, really cool about accelerator programs is you get to have a demo day. And demo days are a big, big deal. It's kind of you standing up in front of all of these different people that you may not otherwise be able to get in front of, tons of networking opportunities, corporate sponsors, press. And you're standing up there and you get about 5 minutes in front of this really big screen to pitch your idea. It's a super exciting day. And so, there are a lot of benefits in going through Accelerator, even though you're kind of giving up a higher piece of equity there. Um, and some folks that have come out of accelerator program wins, again, these are really, really big names that all started in an accelerator. Probably the most famous is Y Combinator, but that's not to say that's the only one. We have plenty of them here in Louisville. Um, kind of moving on, something that I think is really important that a lot of people don't necessarily think about because they're just so eager to get funded to generate capital, is that a founder-investor relationship should be mutually beneficial. This isn't a relationship. This is something that you're most likely going to be in it with them for the long haul. So it needs to work on both sides of the equation. They need to be able to provide capital and advice and resources to you just as much as you need to provide an asset to their portfolio. So we need to be thinking about this is really a two-way street when you're seeking funding. It should be a mutually beneficial relationship. So I think in thinking about that, it's really important to understand, if we're thinking about empathy for the investor, we need to understand and define what it is that we want as founders. What is it exactly that we want? Because it's not always just capital. There are other things that kind of come into play. So the first thing that I would recommend that you start doing is outlining your goals. And this seems, pretty straightforward. But I think that a lot of people, again, you just get so caught up in the rat race of seeking capital and going from investor meeting to investor meeting and pitching that a lot of times you forget about your why, or how much you're raising and why you want to do that. So I think it's really important to outline and establish and feel really good about how much you want to raise and why are you looking for that particular amount. And then kind of be able to articulate to the investor, how is this going to be able to help you break even or get to the next fundable milestone? And a hint is that time is not a fundable milestone. A lot of times, folks will go in and they're like, well, this will give me an 18-month runway. That's not necessarily what an investor would consider a fundable milestone. Those are going to be more things like rapid learning. Are you meeting specific goals? Are you generating traction? There are specific revenue targets. So there are other very specific fundable milestones that you need to be thinking about when you're talking about how much you want and why you want it. That said, I will, encourage that you should plan for about 3 months extra. That's not necessarily what you're asking, what your goal is, but you should plan around having a little bit of 3 months extra lead time there just to be able to get to that next milestone. So finding the right investor, I think, it's really important to do your homework. Oftentimes, folks are excited just to be in front of an investor, and they're not necessarily thinking about, hey, this is a mutually beneficial relationship. What do I want out of it? What is it that I'm looking for? And how can I make sure that this is the right investor for me? So the first thing that I would encourage people to do is research investors' theses. Like I said earlier, investors are not monoliths. They all have different things that they're investing in, that they're interested in. And so you want to make sure that they're kind of aligned with you, that what their thesis is matches up with your product and what you're selling. And then also thinking about what investors invest at your stage, because not all investors are going to want to invest in early stage companies. So making sure that you find the right investor that invests in the stage or the series that you're in right now. What is their perceived level of risk? And does your company offer the rewards that kind of mitigate those risks? Is it a worthwhile investment? What is their average check size? So, if you're seeking 500K, but you're talking to an investor, you're interested in pursuing an investor who generally writes $1 million, $4 million checks, that's probably not going to be the right fit for either of you. So you're not really doing yourself any favors by necessarily going after these big giant investors who are writing these big giant checks when you're just starting out and maybe you just need, 200, 500K to get up and running. Um, you want to consider debt versus equity. So there are firms that are called venture debt firms, and they're a little bit more traditional in terms like you would get a loan from a bank. They're going to give you money and they're going to give you resources, but they expect you to pay them back. So are you interested in that kind of venture, or are you looking for a more traditional equity style venture where you're getting funded and an investor is going to take some equity out of your company? So that's something to kind of consider when you're looking for the right investor is, do you want to go venture debt or do you want to go traditional VC? And then it might be really enticing to say, oh, this company has invested in Uber and I'm working on autonomous vehicles, or this company invested in Tesla. You don't want to necessarily go up against, or investors are not necessarily interested in competing in their own portfolio. So going after an investor that is in the same space or has invested in a direct competitor of yours might seem appealing and it might feel like it makes sense, but it's actually not a great idea. Kind of moving on from that, I think that it's really important to define what else it is you want and need beyond capital and seeking out an investor that's going to be able to help you with that. So, for example, if you're looking to grow your team, you want to make sure that the investors that you're working with and that you're pitching to, that they offer those kinds of resources like team building, that they're going to be able to put you in front of the right talent. So thinking through, what it is aside from capital that you're looking for out of this relationship. Is it a good culture fit? So again, I'm going to hit on that word relationship, because you don't want to date someone who has a completely different approach to life than you, and you certainly don't want to enter a relationship with an investor if it's not a good vibe, if it's not a good culture fit, if you guys have different things that make you tick. It's probably not going to be the right relationship or partnership for you. Are they coming in on fair terms? So really kind of establishing what the terms are that you want, and making sure that the terms that these firms are coming at you with kind of align with your goals. That's actually really important because oftentimes these terms are going to parlay and cascade into additional funding rounds. So establishing the terms that you want and setting those up from the beginning is really important. And then lastly, kind of recapping all of this is do your own due diligence, right? So like, if you get an investor meeting or you're looking to get an investor meeting, make sure you've done your homework on who they are, kind of understand them as a person, as well as an investor. Like oftentimes on websites, for different investing firms, they'll have a bio page for specific investors or partners. And you can really get to know them. You can read their blog posts. You can really understand kind of what makes them tick. And then you can also kind of understand the kinds of companies that they're interested in investing in and making sure that you're aligned there. So doing your own due diligence is actually really, really important. And it's something that's easy to lose sight of because you're so interested in getting the capital. You're not thinking about, hey, this is a relationship, this is a long-term relationship, and it's going to define my business forever, kind of moving forward. So you need to do your own due diligence and be mindful of that. So we're going to take a look at a couple of different personas of investors. And as someone who spent a lot of time doing UX, I'm really big on creating personas. We don't have time, unfortunately, to get into a whole persona exploration exercise, but I thought that I would do a high level overview of just this is not all of them, just some of the different investor personas that you might encounter. So the first one is the follower. This is probably the most common type of investor that you're going to see. They really care about what other investors are doing and if other investors are interested in talking to you. These guys, they rarely lead. They rarely lead the funding rounds. They're usually going to be kind of people who come on additional rounds, or they're joining other investors on a specific round, but they're generally not the leaders. Again, like I said, it's a very common persona. So if you find yourself, looking or speaking to someone who you can kind of tag as like, this is a follower, type of investor, you might want to think about having another investor on board, whether that's from another VC firm or you've got an angel, somebody else who's kind of, saying like, this is legit. They're passing the muster here, and making sure that you've got that in your back pocket. Otherwise, the follower is probably not going to be super interested in you. Another persona is the academic. And these are folks who are really into thesis-driven investing. So they stick to their guns when it comes to investing based on their personal or their organization's thesis. These are really, really valuable partnerships. Oftentimes these folks will come in and take a leadership role. You want to make sure that you're aligned with their thesis because that's what they're going all in on. And you want to be able to support to support the information that you're selling or spinning with data and insights, because these folks, they're going to want to know the data there. Um, and then you have the feeler, and then that's intuition-based investing. And these are generally people that are good at judging people. They're going to be very loyal to you. You want to listen for things like to peg these people. You're going to want to listen for things like, this is what my intuition says, or I'm trusting my gut. This is generally, it's going to be a little bit more of a serendipitous kind of investment. Versus any of these other archetypes. And then the last one, and I have a little typo here, this is going to be data-driven investors. And so they're going to be data-driven, obviously, in their investing thesis. Usually they're transparent and consistent in how they're investing. They're generally really collaborative. They enjoy having strategic discussions. So getting really transparent, getting really honest with them, and thinking through how you want to grow your business, what's working, what's not working. You want to be really strategic and transparent with them. And then at the end of your meeting, it's really nice to send these kinds of folks an investment memo. It's going to mean a lot to them. So, one thing that I'll say is oftentimes founders work really hard to understand their customer base, their audience base, right? I would say it's equally as important to know your investors as well as you do your customers. This is something, again, a lot of folks don't necessarily think about because they're just like, I need capital, I need capital. But you're not necessarily thinking about what beyond capital do you need and what is it out of this relationship that you're looking for, and make sure that it's something that's mutually beneficial. So you're establishing empathy and engagement on both sides of the equation there. So now that we've kind of talked about some different types of investors, some myths about them, and then kind of what makes them tick, we're going to think about tailoring the story for these different types of audiences and these different types of investors that you're going to be speaking to potentially. So why is this a good exercise? There's a lot of reasons. One, it shows that you understand your business. You can, really showcase that you have a good understanding of your business and you have a good understanding of their business and you have a good understanding of just in general where you're going because you've done your homework, because you're really speaking their language, you're speaking to them specifically. It establishes trust. So if you're hitting on the same high notes and low notes that an investor might be interested in, you're establishing trust. You're saying, hey, this is a good vibe, right? Like this is a good relationship opportunity here. So you're establishing trust by speaking their language, by recognizing what makes them tick, what they might be wary of. So you're building trust kind of around that relationship there. It makes you more relatable. So that's kind of along the same vein, right? So it makes you somebody that they're like, oh, I get what you're saying. I get what you're doing. I like you as a human. I'm going to want to invest with you. So it makes you more relatable of a person, and makes your company a little bit more relatable to their portfolio. Shows that you've done your homework. So if you haven't done your homework for an investor meeting, they're going to say, it's not going to be as meaningful. When you've done your homework with an investor, or if you're pitching to a group of investors, you want to make sure that, hey, I've done my homework. I know what I'm talking about. I'm really interested in this, and I've been willing to put in the due diligence to speak directly to this audience. It also positions you as an industry expert. So even if you're not necessarily an industry expert, by taking the time to know your investor and curtailing your message to that specific audience, you can really position yourself as an industry expert because you've gone above and beyond in terms of your own due diligence there. And then lastly, it sets you apart. Investors get tons of decks thrown at them, decks on their desks. That's hard to say. They get a lot of decks thrown at them on their desks. And a lot of times these are folks that are looking at that, that 10 slide or prescription that a lot of people feel like they have to follow. And those get really mundane and monotonous. And when you're speaking directly to your investor and you're using language that speaks to them, it's really going to set you apart from the competition, because they're going to say, hey, this person has really done their homework. They get me. I'm going to take the time to get them. So how do we begin seeking establishing this message? How do we begin tailoring this message? So we talked about knowing your audience quite a bit. So again, doing your homework, understanding the investor, what makes them tick. The other thing that you want to think about when you're writing your narrative for this is adjusting your tone and style. So if you think about in your day-to-day interactions, you're talking to your mom differently than your kid, that differently than you are, maybe your partner. Um, so investors, again, they're not monoliths, they're not all the same person. So, if you're talking to a conservative investor, you might want to, button up your presentation a little bit. You might want to adjust the language that you're using a little bit, versus if you're working with a very small up and coming, VC fund, you can be a little bit more relaxed and you can be a little bit more hip and cool. So you want to be able to adjust your tone and style based on the investor and the type of investor that they are. You want to make sure that you align your ask and offer. So this kind of harkens back to, understanding your check size, how much you want, because you want to make sure that what your ask and offer is aligned with with their investment thesis. You want to be able to anticipate feedback and questions when you're tailoring your narrative. So different investors are going to poke holes in different ways. So kind of, putting on your investor hat there and thinking about, if they're a climate tech investor, how are they going to poke holes in it versus if they're a traditional VC? Those are going to be different questions. There's going to be different feedback that you're going to receive from those people. So I think it's really important to anticipate that and kind of take out your sticky notes like we talked about last time. Just start doing some brainstorming, write out some hard-hitting questions, and then be prepared to answer those. Simplifying complex information. So we talked a little bit about this last week. Investors, they may or may not have been in your industry before, so you don't want to come at them with them thinking like with the assumption that they have the same technical knowledge or the same industry knowledge as you, because they don't necessarily have that. So you want to make sure that you simplify that complex information. You're not using a bunch of jargon. You're not going too far off the rail in terms of esoteric information. You're simplifying that and you're putting it in terms that just about anyone can understand. You want to keep your story concise and keep it focused. Investors are busy, busy people. They don't have a ton of time. And so, you really want to kind of get on with the point and talk about what it is that you're trying to express, that your problem solution, your value proposition, all of that. You want to keep it concise and focused. You don't want to go, again, too far off the rails because you're going to lose attention and it's not going to be meaningful anymore. And then you want to highlight your value proposition. And I'm going to kind of get into this one a little bit deeper because I think that this is one way to really have a good example of how you can customize your messaging from one investor type to another. So we're going to take a look at this company called TIPA. This is a real company. And what TIPA does is they create compostable packaging. They're working to solve the plastic problem that we have. So they've created compostable packaging. So if they were talking to a corporate or a strategic investor, their value proposition, what the crux of their story is that they might be spinning might look something like this. TIPA Corp leads the sustainable packaging revolution, offering eco-friendly solutions in the $200 billion industry. Our partnership opportunity enables corporate investors to meet sustainability goals, comply with regulations, and access the growing eco-conscious market. Collaborate with TIPA to innovate, open new markets, and secure a competitive advantage in sustainability. Join us in shaping a greener future. So here, what they're doing with this value proposition they have a narrative, they know what they're seeking, but really what they're focusing this value prop on is strategic alignment, right? Our partnership opportunity, mutual growth and innovation, meeting sustainability goals, accessing the growing eco-conscious market, regulatory compliance and risk mitigation. They're addressing that because that's something that the corporate investor is going to be very interested in. And then their CTA, which stands for call to action, is partnering with them for a sustainable future. So as we talked about previously, a corporate or strategic investor is really going to be all in on this partnership and creating deep partnerships. So it's important that, that they're talking about collaboration, that they're talking about partnerships when they are when they're spinning their narrative for this particular investor. So we'll take that and juxtapose it to what that might look like if they were talking to a traditional VC. And one thing to note is that this narrative, the overall goal is staying the same. It's really just how they're tweaking the language here to appeal to a different audience. So TIPA Corp disrupts a $200 billion packaging industry with innovative biodegradable solutions, meeting the rising demand for sustainability. Our scalable model and proprietary technology position us for rapid growth and profitability, offering investors a lucrative investment in the expanding eco-friendly market. Invest in TIPA for substantial returns and to drive sustainable future. So again, it's the ask is essentially the same. Their narrative is essentially the same. It's just the language that they're using and how they're kind of positioning that to these different audience types that's giving it a difference and kind of giving you a one up in the audience in which they're speaking to. So with a traditional VC, this value proposition is really going to be focused more on the opportunity. So they're coming right in with a disrupting of a $200 billion packaging industry. This is a huge market. They are addressing consumer and regulatory trends. They're talking about a scalable model, proprietary technology positioning to grow rapidly. They're talking a lot about financial returns, profitability, lucrative investment, and then their call to action at the end is to invest for substantial returns and a sustainable future. So, again, really focusing on the money that they're going to be getting back, the returns that the investor is going to be receiving. So it's not quite so much based on the partnership as it is, how much money can this investor stand to make out of this transaction? So that's just one example of how you might think about, changing your value proposition and changing how you speak to an investor based on sort of who they are, what style of investor they are, and kind of their thesis. So one thing that I think is important to think about when we're talking about this is that you don't want to come up with a different story for every different audience, because you're going to get lost in it. It's not going to be cohesive. You're not going to be able to pitch it correctly. So it doesn't necessarily look like this. We discussed last time this kind of spark line, this sort of like ebb and flow um narrative of that came to us from Nancy Duarte, and we're talking about this middle piece right here, and here's where I'm really thinking that you should focus on switching up your language and thinking about the language that you're using and curtailing that language to the specific audience. So kind of this contrast of what has been and what could be, and how do you fit into that equation, and how can you spin that to make it something that's interesting for your audience, for your particular investor. So instead of having different stories for each investor or different decks for each investor, what you want to think about is that you have this overarching narrative, right? Like the change that you can bring forth, and you're very passionate about the change that you can bring forth in your industry or your market. That narrative is not going to change from one person to the next. What might change are going to be the problems and the solutions that these folks are going to be looking at. And kind of again thinking about that TIPA analogy where we're pivoting our language. We're not pivoting our story, but we're pivoting our language to make it something a little bit more enticing based on the audience that we're speaking to. So if you're talking to an angel investor, what you might want to focus on is striking an emotional chord. They're investing their personal money. This should feel personal to them. They want to be personally invested. You want to make sure that they can experience the product. So spend a good amount of time, walking them through the product, even if it's just a little prototype. It doesn't have to be anything, extravagant. It's just, they want to be able to experience the product so they understand it. You want to be able to establish credibility with metrics because, again, at the end of the day, this is an investment. So you're going to need to show that there's a real business case. It's not just personal, that there is a real business case to focus on here. And if you have existing partnerships, like say you maybe already have a couple of customers or you have a couple of people who are interested in partnering with you, go ahead and showcase that to an angel investor. So that's just, one way to think about how to focus your narrative towards angel investors. And then when you're talking to VCs, it's going to be a little bit different. Here, you want to kind of think about your narrative in terms of how can you showcase evidence of potential success, right? So this is all about the returns and how much money they're going to be able to make off of it. You want to leverage your past triumphs, like why should they invest in you? Why are you the right people to do it? If you've had other exits, if you are an industry insider, go ahead and leverage that information. And then you want to be able to provide a comprehensive market analysis. So showcasing that you truly do understand your market, um, and that you can come in and make a significant market impact there. For corporate strategic investors, again, this is really all about partnerships. So you want to make sure that what you're spinning and how you're selling your narrative to them is going to go all in on aligning with their company, their business strategy. You want to talk about how you can foster innovation within this corporation. So a lot of times these are big behemoths and they get kind of stuck in a rut. How can you come in and help them create something new? And in doing so, is there an opportunity to drive new market potential? One thing I will say about spinning your narrative for corporate strategic investors is always get them to sign an NDA first. You want to have some trust there before you give all of the information away. And then lastly, coming back to accelerator programs, when you're trying to get into or you're pitching to accelerator programs, what you want to focus on is why is your product unique? Like what makes you one of the 12 or whoever gets accepted in this program? Why do you stand out? Focus on your innovation. And how is this innovation kind of signaling that you have a product that's in demand? Why is that? And you want to be able to offer information on your IP, which is your intellectual property, and also understanding the market. So all of these are, your narrative is not going to change. It's the way that you're telling the story that's going to change. But overall, your overarching narrative stays essentially the same. So we looked at this slide last time, and I think it's just important to kind of note that stories like strategies are going to evolve. So the younger you are in your journey as an entrepreneur, the more it's going to be about the vision and kind of what you're representing with your vision, and the less about execution because there hasn't been time for that yet. And the further along you get in that path, the investors are going to be more interested on execution. How are you doing this? It's not just, it's not just an idea anymore. This is a real tangible product. This is a real business. What does the trajectory look like there? So you want to think about how to focus your narrative per stage. So pre-seed, you want to focus on the fact that you have a unique problem and you have a novel solution for solving this problem. You want to showcase that you have a good understanding of your market, that you have a plan to raise money, that you have an MVP, which is a minimum viable product. And that can be something, it doesn't have to be coded, it doesn't have to be something that's actually built. It can be just a prototype is totally fine. And you want to say, I've got early interest. I've got some users that are interested in this. And focus your narrative around that. Seed, you're going to be kind of thinking about your narrative, explaining that you have a functional product, that there is a product market fit, that you have established a user base, that you have done a little bit deeper of a dive in developed better market research, and that here you're focusing on the fact that you have a minimal viable team. So focusing on the team that you've kind of brought in. So like your CTO, your CEO, like who are the people that are going to be helping you build this business? And then when you're coming into Series A, here you're going to want to showcase that you've achieved product market fit, that you have a proven revenue model. You want to be making about 500K to about 4 million annually. And then here you also want to kind of go all in on team and that you've got an established core team. So you've gone beyond the minimal viable team and you've got your core team established. Why are they the right team to kind of help get you to the next level? And then Series B moving forward, at this point, you've got a really large customer base. You want to talk about that. You've got proven consistent acquisition strategy. You've got a solid leadership team, and you have the ability to double your earnings year over year. So these are just some different ways to think about telling your story and things to focus on when you're telling your story to different investors, depending on what stage you're at in your fundraising. And then there's kind of a three deck strategy that I think is really important to remember. And this isn't to say that they're all different. Usually you have one deck that you kind of base this off of. So you have a teaser deck, which is usually 5 to 10 slides. This is something that an investor might see ahead of time. You don't want to give away everything. Really the key here is that you want to get them to say yes to a meeting. And then you have your tailored deck. And this is kind of the genesis, right? Like this is the deck you should start with, I think. This is going to be, anywhere between like 15 to 25 slides. I might, go further to 15 slides or stay closer to 15 slides there. But here you want to show that you've done your homework, you're a prepared partner, you're answering those burning questions, you've done your research, right? And then here's where you really want to tailor your message and how you're speaking to your deck, not necessarily rewriting your deck, but how you're speaking to your deck. Tailor your messaging and key points based on this research that you've done and these sort of personas that you've outlined. And then lastly is your partnership deck. And this is going to be a pretty small deck. It doesn't need to be every slide. What you want to think about with this deck is you've got all of these investors in a room. You've got about 10 to 15 minutes to present your case. And so you want to have a really thick appendix in this one. You want to go back to that exercise where you're thinking about different questions that investors will ask you. And you want to have an appendix, and it doesn't have to be beautiful, but a slide that's essentially going to answer each of these questions. And I know that we are again running out of time, but we're going to talk quickly about virtual pitching. And we talked about this last time that attention spans are shrinking. This is so when you're pitching virtually, not only are you competing against different portfolio companies who are vying for investors' attention, but you're competing against Slack, Teams, email, text messages, all kinds of digital noise. So attention spans are shrinking, and that comes into play a lot when you're thinking about virtual pitching. Virtual pitching, it's also going to be different. You're not in person. So the focus is really going to be a lot more on your slides. You're just kind of like this little thumbnail up in the top right-hand corner or whatever. And so your slides are going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting. That's not to say you need to inundate your slides with statistics and data, but just be mindful of the fact that your slides should look good and they should be representational of what you're speaking to. It's going to be a little bit harder to build trust when you're pitching virtually because you don't have that kind of like in-person energy going. You want to be sure that you're willing to over communicate. You want to be sure that you're prepared to share, how is this going? What are you doing? What's working? What's not working? And then you want to be sure to, have those little tidbits where you're kind of shifting this power and you're massaging the ego a little bit and reminding investors why them and why this is a good partnership for you and why this would be a good partnership for them. And then the format is a little bit different. You want to be prepared. You want to have spent a lot of time practicing your opening line and hook. And that again can vary from investor to investor, depending on who you're talking to. You want to make this more of a conversational type of format. Something that could kind of easily segue into spinning up your pitch. And you want to keep up the energy. This is, it's kind of partially informing, partially engaging. So you need to be able to keep up the energy, making your story compelling to your audience throughout your narrative here. And like we talked about, attention spans are shorter, so keep it engaging. Have less content on each slide because you're really going to lose attention. You're going to lose focus when investors are reading your slide. Then they're really not paying attention to you. So you want to make sure that you're kind of tailoring your slides to that, and keeping your presentation short and sweet, because again, they're busy people and they don't have a lot of time. So getting straight to the point there. When crafting your deck, you do want to craft an engaging story. You don't want to create multiple stories for each investor because you're not going to win that way. You do want to know your audience inside and out, have done your homework. Don't take a one-size-fits-all approach. This is not going to work well in your favor. You do want to make it precise and engaging. Don't drown them in the details. Don't use a ton of jargon. Don't be ambiguous. Make it precise and make it relevant and engaging to the audience you're speaking to. You do want to create a compelling arc. So, kind of going back to what we talked about last week, creating a good middle, beginning, and an end. And then you don't want it to be monotonous. You don't want to necessarily drown them or make it boring. You want to make a compelling story. And then lastly, you want to reclude with a resounding resolution. What you don't want to do is overpromise. Don't commit to things that you can't live up to, because nobody wins in that scenario. And I know we are again out of time. I just love sharing information with you guys. So I'm going to leave you with this quote. This is from Paul Graham, who's the founder of Y Combinator: "Make something people want." And I think this is a relevant quote for this conversation, because not only are you thinking about it from the founder perspective of making a product people want, but you're also thinking about it from the investor's perspective of making it an investment that somebody wants to get into. So I think this was a good quote to leave it on. And I don't know if there's time for questions, but that's what I've got today.
Yes, thank you so much, Shala. That was once again extremely informative. I love how you broke it down based on the investor type, the type of language that you should be using, things like that. It's such an easy format to follow. And as a founder myself, sometimes, I struggle with that. So I really appreciate that. We do have a few questions in the chat that I will, well, we have a question and then a comment. So the comment says, both investors and founders waste an enormous amount of time trying to find a fit, like trying to find a spouse. Matchmaking should get more efficient if AI can be used to narrow down the focus for both parties. I think that's a great, great point, Carl. And there are some tools that are trying to be developed to do that matchmaking for you, so you spend less time trying to figure out which investors are most interested in the things that you are building. Yes, yes, Marjan, you can ask a question orally. And I hope I said your name right.
Yes, hi, good morning, good afternoon, whatever the time zone you are. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shahla. It was really, really nice.
Thank you.
One question I have for you, actually, there are two questions. If I separate them, it might be better. First thing first, a while ago, I was presenting in front of it was in front of one of these massive investment banks, but they were running some form of like a supportive program. It was a founder's pitch, and they were giving some pro bono support as well as some grant money for the project. And I went with exactly the same format, that 5 to 10 slides, don't talk more than 5 minutes, and try to fit in as much as I could. And first round of pitching, they selected out of 28 people presented, they selected 8. I was one of the 8. And we went for the second round, and the time was not extended. The only thing they added 5 minutes of a Q&A.
Okay.
And I went for that. I made some improvement on the pitch, but same 5 minutes pitching, 5 to 10 slides. And I didn't get the grant. I wasn't selected. They were selecting 3 out of 8. But the feedback I received, they were impressed with my knowledge. They were impressed. It was a bricks and mortar business. It wasn't something faff in the air, some form of app somewhere. But those 3 people that got the funding or they got the grant, what amazed me is that none of them, no, one of them, she had some home business, kitchen, kind of making some food products out of recyclable products that the restaurants didn't want. But the other 2, they hadn't even sold 1 unit, not even 1 unit. And they still managed to press the judges. And I've been operating for more than 10 years. So I had a proven evidence that whatever I'm going to be selling, the service, is working. I just need to expand. And I'm just wondering that if I can get some feedback, whether it was just the wrong shoes, I was trying to fit in my shoes into the wrong shoes, I don't know, or whether I missed something along the line, because one of the criticism that we received some feedback that where it went, what was good, what was wrong. They were impressed with the idea, with the knowledge of me, of the market, blah, blah, blah. But what was there is that for expansion, my cost, it was a little bit not very clear what money I wanted for what exactly. But I made it quite clear what was the rough idea. And also I made it was only 5 minutes. How much I could have talked? I could have talked about it for half an hour.
Yeah.
And the others, they haven't even sold 1 unit, but they're expecting to have a revenue of 2.5 million by year 2027 without even selling one unit. And I just don't know how it works, or maybe I
Yeah.
got it wrong. I don't know. I'd like to have some feedback on that, that when you're going against people that they're selling something that it hasn't proven itself, but down the line, it sounds very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
How you supposed to compete with that? And second question maybe is that another listener was saying that trying to find the right investors, because you mentioned that it's better not to go with people already got something similar in their profile.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, especially in my industry, what I notice are lots of people that don't have enough knowledge of it to understand what I'm trying to pitch to them.
Sure.
So yeah,
Okay.
I appreciate your feedback on this. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Marjan. Yeah, so I think for the first question, without really having like a lot of context as to, the pitch competition and sort of what what they were looking for, it's kind of hard to give, a knowledge-filled answer there. Sometimes it might just be something like maybe they weren't really looking at the tech or the particular market that you were pitching to. They may, and I agree. I think it's really hard when you don't have necessarily a real tangible product. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. It could be something as simple as like, they're just maybe not interested in pursuing that market, or they maybe are just not interested in funding this particular business for a myriad of reasons. I don't disagree. I think that it's really nice when you have a product and you have traction and you have all of that already. But without knowing a little bit more about the competition and who the judges were and what they might specifically be looking for, it's a little hard to answer that. But it may have something to do with the particular market that they're interested in seeking or going after. It may be have something to do with an investment thesis that we may not be privy to. And sometimes it's just not a good vibe. Like, at the end of the day, maybe it's just not the right, it doesn't feel right for them. So if we think about that feeler kind of persona, maybe it had something to do with that. And there's really not much that you can do, when it comes to just, it's just not a good vibe. It just wasn't. But I can certainly see where, if you have a product that's already being sold and you already have some traction, that is very appealing. And so it's simple to say, well, these people don't have a product, and I don't like fluffing the numbers. I discourage that. And I think a lot of times investors can kind of see through when you fluff your numbers up. Like, it's really hard to say when you don't have any traction or you don't have any products sold yet, that, oh, we're going to be this kind of valuation in 2 years, because you don't really know that. But what people are looking at is really the market size. Excuse me. And then again, thinking about kind of the investment thesis and the type of innovation that they might be interested in investing in based on their thesis. So I'm happy, if you want, feel free to send me an email and I'm happy to talk to you in more detail about it. We can take a look at the specific scenario and kind of try to figure out like where are outliers there, and where could this have just been a bad fit, or are there things that could have been improved in the pitch that you're presenting and how you're presenting it. I'm happy to talk to you about that a little bit more. I'll shoot here's my info. If you want to send me an email, I'm happy to grab coffee or whatever, and we can talk about that a little bit more. And then I'm sorry, I forgot your second question.
Okay, just let me take a screenshot of this. Sorry.
Sure.
Um, yeah. Okay. Sorry about the noise. I was taking a screenshot. Yeah, the second question was that on the same line as as Carl asking
Mhm.
about, you have to find the right investors.
That's right.
And you mentioned of so many ways that you can figure out the right investor.
Yes.
But at the same time, you said that it's better not to go with somebody who's already invested into this market, because you don't want to have competition in
Okay.
their portfolio. But my question is that sometimes when I try to pitch to people that they got the money but have got no understanding from my industry, I notice that they don't get it.
They don't
As
get
simple
it.
as
Yeah.
that.
They don't get it. So I appreciate that question, and sorry, I should have written it down, but I think, to be clear, and this may have not been clear in the way that I was presenting it previously, but to be clear, What you want to avoid is someone who's like a direct competitor that you've identified as a direct competitor to you. I think it is important to have investors that understand your market and your market space. So if you have a consumer product, you don't necessarily want to go after a person who has had great success in fintech. That's not necessarily what they're going to be interested in. To your point, you know, a lot of times, especially when you're looking at deep tech, it takes a certain kind of investor to understand that market and understand the technology behind it. So, you know, I think it is good to seek out investors who have invested in your market or have an industry knowledge base in your market, but not necessarily seeking out an investor who's invested in a direct competitor, going into that with the assumption of, oh, this person invested in my direct competitor, and so they must want to invest in me because, you know, I'm doing the same thing, only I'm doing it better. Because at that point, they're really kind of competing with themselves. You know, that said, I do think it's important to seek out investors who have that same, who do invest in the space that you're in. Just not necessarily like, you know, if you will use like big companies, for example. But if you were, you know, if you're selling Lyft, you don't necessarily, you want to have, you want to go in with an investor who understands, you know, a consumer market space, who understands a ride sharing space, but you don't necessarily want to go in with Uber's investor, because at that point, then they're really kind of competing with themselves. Does that help clarify at all?
Yeah, it is. But in terms of, to just give you an example, recently I have been approached by an angel investor
Mhm.
that they are very interested in investing in me. However, I've had two Zoom meetings
Mhm.
with the front guy, and they tend to ask quite a lot of questions. For example, the sites I got on mind for building my facilities, so on and so
Mhm.
forth. And he likes me to share those type of information. Is it good? Is it not good? Is it,
Yeah, no,
you
I
know,
mean,
how much of the trust you have to start off with?
yeah, absolutely. And I think we kind of touched on this briefly in the context of corporate and strategic partners. I don't think that it's unheard of to ask, you know, to ask to these people to sign an NDA. And a lot of times they are used to it. Like this is, you know, they're used to it because you don't, I hear you, you don't necessarily want to give away all the secret sauce, because you don't want them taking your idea and running with it. At the same time, you know, it's important. So signing an NDA is really not a problem. But at the same time, I think it's also important to remember, like, these are people who are interested in investing in companies. They may have already gone through the founder journey themselves. They may have already done this. They're not interested in running a company and setting it all up and doing it from scratch. They want to invest in companies. They want to expand their investment portfolio. So their reasons of asking these questions may have more to do with like how they're investing and how they're thinking about whether they're going to invest in you versus like taking your idea and kind of running with it. I know it can seem really scary. I totally get that. So if it's helpful, you know, there are lots of ways you can create an NDA online and have them kind of, you know, have them sign it. And I think it's also fine to be honest with an investor and, you know, just saying like, this is really proprietary information. Do you mind signing this NDA? But then also knowing that at the end of the day, they're not necessarily looking to create this company themselves. They're looking to make money off of it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
there are equity investors, but
Hmm.
in return, they want quite a lot of your equity. That's one of the problems I have with them.
Yeah.
They want quite a lot for the
Hmm.
capital they put in. Of
Yes.
course, it's not a debt, so it's not like a bank. You just pay the money back, then the
Mhm.
business is yours when the money is paid off. But yeah, yeah, I shoot you an email with some
Yeah, do that.
questions with my previous pitch deck, as
Yeah.
well as the question about how to create the NDA. And if they get offended by that, so be it. But I worked too hard to identify the sites.
Yeah, they
yeah,
usually won't though. Yeah.
yeah, and if I can jump in here before we hop off of here today, I do want to make 3 points that I kind of noted throughout your conversation, Marjan, is that number one, investors, this is not their first rodeo. They know all the ins and outs and paperwork that they have to sign and things like that. So they probably will have something for you to sign as well. So keep that in mind that, you know, they're not looking to, like Shala said, to steal your ideas, but also in terms of your other two questions, I want to encourage you to go back to last week's webinar where we first started this conversation of building pitch decks and how to draft that narrative, because Shala made some really great examples throughout that webinar of, if you are building something that is very complex or can be hard to articulate, how you can create that relatability with your audience. For example, we are the Uber Eats of retail shopping because people know what Uber Eats is. So I do highly encourage you to go back and watch last week's. And then as far as your pitch competition, I do want to offer, when you are pitching to an audience that is very investor heavy, the most important part to them is the numbers. The data is always going to trump anything else. And so keeping in mind that when you have a really, really, really strong financial narrative, it shows a few different things, right? It shows that you have strategy behind customer acquisition. It shows that you have a very strong knowledge of the market that you want to capture, the market overall, your competitors. It shows that you've thought about how you want to grow. They're not looking for information that is factual, right? They are looking for you, for the knowledge that you have in where you want to go. So if it takes you 4 years instead of 2 years to reach X amount of dollars, you know, that's okay. It's just, they want to know that you have that strong knowledge and that you have some sort of strategy behind how you want to get there, which is how people are able to sell ideas so that they can even just execute. And we do have also some recordings on our YouTube channel from one last year, or one or two from last year, from an actual investor here in our city, who was kind of giving us some ins and outs of what investors are thinking about when they're listening to these pitches and things like that. So that information may be helpful to you as well. We do have to get off of here, you all, for the sake of
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, this has been wonderful. Thank you for all of your questions. Thank you, Shala, for such a robust and informative and valuable webinar today. To all of those who may be watching, just an FYI, this recording will go on the Amplify Louisville YouTube channel. It will also be linked in the post-event email that you will get, as well as Shala's information so that you can contact her if you'd like. Make sure that you're following us on all of our socials, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. It's Amplify Louisville across the board, as well as amplifylouisville.com, so that you can stay up to date with all of the events that's happening around town, including ours. We have a wonderful in-person event called Venture Connectors that's happening tomorrow at the Kentucky Science Center. So if you are interested, make sure you go on our website and register for that. And with that being said, thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope to see you at the next one. Have
Thank
a
you,
good day.
guys. Take care. Merci, ma John.
Bye.
Bye-bye.